Welcome to Curds of Wisdom. We should really have how many editions we've done, how many of these we've done, but um we've had plenty of them now. So we keep all our recordings too on the Couleecap page. So if there's ever a Curds of Wisdom that you haven't um seen, you can go back there. So this is presented by the Badger State Housing Alliance in partnership with Couleecap, the League of Municipalities, and um, uh, the Wisconsin uh, Council of Churches as well. And this is a free speaker series where we come and we talk, have your lunch, and be respectful. Please be muted if you're not a speaker. Where we talk about the housing needs amongst the state and various subtopics therein, from rental to affordable home ownership to today we're going to be talking about land trusts. We try to have these every month, with a few months, sometimes, this is all based on volunteer and staff capacity to create these things. So some months we take some breaks and recharge, but we try to have them on the second Wednesday of each month from noon to 1. Yep, and as I said, just the format of things, we don't really have this in a webinars way, then that allows it to be more accessible for folks. So please, if you're not participating or as put questions in the chat, and we'll try to answer those throughout the and then we'll also have 15 minutes at the end to discuss. Stay muted, use speaker view, and we will share slides and recordings as well, and they are archived usually within a day or two on our website as well. Yeah, that without further ado, we've got some lovely speakers here, and I'll actually I'll let you take over from here and do your thing.
Thanks, Marlo. Well, welcome everyone. Welcome to this Curds of Wisdom series on shared equity home ownership, specifically around community land trusts. My name is Todd Mandel. I'm the executive director of the Wisconsin Partnership for Housing Development. We do not run the land trust, but I have been around the land trust world for almost 20 years now. It pains me to say it. Not that I don't love land trusts, just it pains me to say I've been around anything for 20 years. With that said, we have a great panel today. We're going to talk a little bit about, the panel's going to talk a little bit about land trusts, set the stage for what it means to run one, what the different options are. Then we're going to open it up to questions from all of you, as well as some sort of preset questions if some topics don't come up. And then we'll see where things go from there. So with us today is Olivia Williams. She's the executive director of the Madison Area Community Land Trust, which is the oldest land trust in the state. We have Lamont Davis, who's the executive director of the Milwaukee Community Land Trust, which is one of our newest functioning land trusts, and clearly the land trust in our largest urban area. And Ashley Lacenski, who's the community development director for Couleecap, which oversees the Coulee Community Land Trust, which is our oldest rural or a land trust with a rural footprint in Wisconsin. And so with that, I'm going to toss it over to Lamont to get us started with the land trust presentation. Marlo, if you want to go to the next slide.
Hey, everybody. Thank you for...
Sorry, Lamont, I forgot we added these slides in quick. Real quick, there's a couple housekeeping things, a few Curds of Wisdom coming up in the future. You can see the dates there, so please make sure you get those on your calendars and join us. And the Badger State Housing Alliance website is at the bottom. You can stay up to date on all the Badger State Housing Alliance stuff at that link. Next slide, Marlon. Oh, one too far. Now it's on to you, Lamont. Sorry about that.
Well, thank you all for taking the time to spend your lunchtime and learn something about a new model in affordable housing. The land trusts are really exciting for me, having spent a career working in housing rehabilitation. But I think what was missing is how do you serve everybody in a neighborhood. So the land trust has a powerful solution to bring affordability into home ownership. And the next slide, we'll start to dive into that. Next slide. All right. So land trusts, really simply, what they do is try to bring the affordability into what a home costs. And usually it's done by a couple ways. One is the construction cost is subsidized. But even doing that work, you still get to a point where that cost of the subsidized construction is good for low to moderate income folks, people who make somewhere around 80 or 100% of area median income. But we also know that there's a large populations of people who, without some intervention, may never be able to afford a home. And that's what the land trust really looks to address. And you can see from the graphic, there's a big gap on what buyers that we're trying to serve can actually buy and what homes cost. If you're limited by your income, it's not a whole lot you can do to get a bank loan, but if we can bring down the cost of buying that home, maybe we can get a lot of folks into a home ownership situation. And that's what the land trust aims to do. Next slide. And this work that we're doing is really popular. If you look at the active CLTs that we have, I think we have 4, but also Bayfield, we just got a notice that they're looking really strong. They have a 501c3 application, and they will soon be an active land trust. And we have just a vibrant network of people that get on calls every month to talk about best practices, to support each other peer to peer, to talk about things that are affecting us in the geography of the land trust. And I really, really found the work that we do together as a coalition invaluable, and to a great extent, even getting on this call so that we can educate you all working in the affordable space about what a land trust is what we need to do more of. Because you'll see as we go on and you get deeper into understanding land trust, there's a lot of partnerships that are needed to make land trust work. That's public-private. Sometimes it's nonprofits working with each other, like land trust working with Habitat, or land trust working with housing counseling agencies, but we're growing the network. Next slide. Oh, yeah, in Wisconsin, we have 92 units of homeowners in a land trust homeownership situation, and we had 152 resales of land trust, which basically means that we steward homeowners into this land trust situation, but they exit sometimes out of the land trust situation and they move into maybe fair market housing, maybe they move out of the geography. And so throughout our history, we've been successful in getting at least 152 families through the resale process, which is also a success to the model. Next slide. Oh, still on more on this slide. This slide keeps giving and giving. Since 2018, we have grown land trusts over 40%. When I joined, it was like 285 land trusts, and now to see 315 land trusts throughout the United States. And I guess it's the same for the Wisconsin network. Originally, it was just kind of Madison and Couleecap until the Milwaukee Community Land Trust came on the scene a few years back. And we only created our first units in 2021. So to see all of these planned land trusts and active land trusts, it just lets you know that there's something good in the model and it's growing. I know recently I saw that the White House has even issued guidance saying that land trusts can be an effective tool for affordable housing. Maybe 2 years ago, the governor also issued a health equity report for the state of Wisconsin that recommended land trusts as a tool for housing development. So not only are we locally seeing support, but nationally, we're seeing a lot of support as well.
Marlo, could you click that button about 6 times? Get it all on the screen here. Usually I'm in charge. All right, there we go. The way this model works is we start with an initial affordability investment, a subsidy that could be from a public source. It could be a city, a county, theoretically the state, or it could even be a private, foundation. But we need a chunk of change. It kind of varies based on your locality, how much you need. But to bring the cost down of what the construction or rehab costs and the land costs and property costs of a home, bringing it down to our income levels that we're trying to support, which vary, and I'll get to that. But initial subsidy makes the home affordable. The homeowner then just gets a mortgage for the home only and not the land. And we have lenders we partner with for those kinds of mortgages. And then they sign a ground lease with the land trust that maintains affordability long term. So each ground lease has a resale formula in it. And that buyer agrees to pay it forward and allow someone else to have that opportunity when they're ready to sell their home, so that the home stays affordable for all future buyers. And that way, that initial affordability investment actually stays with the land and multiplies in impact over time. So CLTs continue to own the land and support homeowners long term. And if it's all right, we'll just do questions at the end for me anyway. One more, Marlo. And then this model is really flexible and can be used in hot and cold markets, urban and rural, and really as low as 30% AMI is what we've reached in Madison even recently. And some CLTs actually go beyond 80% AMI and might be reaching more like 120% AMI. So this model, depending on where you are, what your mission and targets are, it can be really versatile. Next slide. So the way that resales work can also vary from place to place. So that local CLT in the planning stages would decide on their resale formula for how the homes are going to be priced in the future. And this can be done, looking at housing data and income data in your locality. And basically the idea is allowing for some equity return to the buyer while also retaining affordability long-term. So the seller or the homeowner who becomes a seller when they're ready to sell their home, they get to keep what they invested in the home plus some of the appreciated value while that home still stays below market price. And this again is written into the ground lease from the home purchase. It's versatile in these different markets. And even across Wisconsin, CLTs are using different resale formulas. So some ways this can be approached is you could have sort of an index that is referenced every year for how our income's growing in our area or cost of living. And you could tie sale prices and like kind of the interest gained on home value, tie it to actual like current cost of living per year. That's one way to do it. The way we do it in Madison is a fixed rate annual percentage rate, sort of 1% interest. And then you could, kind of depending on where you are, some CLTs decide on 1.25%, 1.5%, kind of added to that initial purchase price each year. So it's a predictable way to consider how the home price is going to increase over time. Another way, kind of more old school way of doing it is taking an appraisal when the home is bought and when it's sold. And the appreciation is, so the homeowner gets to sell it for what they bought it for plus 25% of the appreciation, the difference between those appraisals. So this is a little bit in the weeds, but just to tell you that there's a lot of variety in how these resale formulas can work, and it varies across the state. But in general, it's a much better approach for the homeowner, they're saving in their principal in their mortgage when most of them have only been able to rent before. So they're at least saving in their principal plus some appreciation on that home value. Next slide. So the benefits to homeowners is they have stable monthly housing expenses that are predictable, usually a 30-year fixed rate mortgage. So that's, you know, much better than being at the whims of your landlord and not knowing when your rent is going to go up and by how much. It's also a way to build home equity for starting a business, paying tuition, or buying a market rate home later. And since the Madison Area Community Land Trust has been around over 30 years, we've seen plenty of examples of folks who've said, you know, this has allowed them to start a business or pay for medical costs or save, you know, in ways that they weren't able to as renters. And many of our home owners have gone on to buy a market rate home after living in our CLT homes. They also gain autonomy over the home living in CLTs, you know, which is something you don't have as a renter, to paint the walls or, you know, do whatever you want to your home. Also, one of the greatest kind of assets, I think, of the CLT model for as a affordable home ownership solution is that we offer post-purchase support. So CLT staff are always here as a backstop. If homeowners have questions on, you know, how to replace a furnace filter or falling behind on their mortgage payments or anything that can come up for first-time homeowners. They also have the opportunity to pass the home to heirs as long as those heirs are meet our income requirements. So we do have to verify income, but the home can stay in a family long-term as well. And we've seen examples of that in our land trust also. There's also been a lot of cool research on community land trusts that discuss the reduction in foreclosure rates between conventional homeowners versus CLT homeowners. So CLT homeowners see a 90% risk reduction, largely in part or largely due to the post-purchase support that CLT staff can provide, as well as having to get mortgages that are not from kind of predatory institutions. So that's kind of, I can do a deeper dive on that if there's questions on it, but because we work with partner lenders and they're reliable, our homeowners are much less likely to get into trouble. And then there's public benefits to CLTs. It's an efficient use of public funds with an investment that stays with the land forever. So you saw on that first slide that, or one of the first slides, that while there's like 92 currently occupied CLT homes in Wisconsin, we've impacted 152 families with those 92 homes. So that initial investment does multiply and impact over time. And it also stays in place. So, you know, if we invest in a neighborhood in Madison now in the Isthmus, it'll become way too expensive for anyone, even median income, to live, you know, literally next year or in 5 years. So keeping those homes affordable in place is one way to, you know, make sure that low-income people are able to live in desirable neighborhoods. It also provides a homeownership pathway for those marginalized from homeownership in the first place. So it's a good kind of starter home entry into the homeownership market, and creates a needed supply of workforce housing in areas where, you know, especially kind of vacation destinations in Wisconsin. We have a couple of CLTs that are really working in this space of, like, you know, where do the workers live who are serving this area? So CLTs can be a good solution in that way too. And next slide. Turn it over to Ashley.
Sorry, I forgot to unmute myself. Some things to consider when you are looking at forming a land trust is really just the fact that This stewardship of this is a long-term permanent commitment. It's not just putting a house into the land trust and forgetting about it. The leases that tie the home to the ground are 98-year leases that you will need to be able to support throughout that lease term. You also need to think about your long-term sustainability plan, since it will likely be someone else taking over and executing that plan as part of that project. It's also important to think about long-term support and funding. Where are you going to continue to find the development subsidy so that you can scale up and increase your CLT units, as well as funding for your operations. It's critical that you have staff that can work on the stewardship and engagement with the homeowners, as well as support those homeowners after they've already purchased their properties. And it's also a good idea to consider the community input, the involvement, and the investment. The community needs to be invested in this as well. Again, it's a long-term commitment with a 98-year lease, and engaging them early on and upfront in conversations to get their buy-in and support of the land trust program will generally make things go smoother and easier as you're talking to these communities. A lot of times the concept of the land trust is unfamiliar to folks, and it will require a lot of conversations and education on the model and what it looks like and how it supports families. There are some resources available. So there's a national network called Grounded Solutions, and they provide TA resources. They have a resource library listed on their website. They can offer some consulting for individuals looking at starting a land trust. You can also look at trying to hire a private consultant as well. Having a consultant help with the startup of the land trust is helpful and makes things smoother and easier for those folks. And then they also provide some training and educational events around land trust things. And as Lamont mentioned earlier, we also have our monthly CLT, Wisconsin CLT Network meetings. We discuss a variety of issues, statewide funding needs and initiatives. We support each other, answer questions. We share learning and conference opportunities. Right now, we're a very loosely formed group, but we have actually, just as of today, kind of talked about whether or not we want to take the next step and sort of solidify membership requirements and things like that more. But it's really a great place to learn about other land trusts in the state of Wisconsin and what they're working on, and just learn more about the land trust in general. Next slide. And so in our Wisconsin CLT network, we have spent a lot of time talking about potential resources for the land trust, because it is a critical component, and it's, you know, the thing that makes us be able to scale up and build more properties. And so as part of this, we've really looked a lot to our neighbors in Minnesota who have a really strong land trust network and have been around for a long time and have a lot of units in their portfolio. And so we've talked a lot about what resources do we currently have available in Wisconsin, and what are some potential resources that we might be able to use. So we've talked about home funds and Hickory funds, CDBG funds. Some of them have their own challenges within. We've also talked about funding that isn't currently available, but that we could likely access if we had some additional advocacy on those items. Our network has had meetings with WIDA as well as Decker to discuss ways that they could help support building out the CLT network. But by providing funding, we talked to them about, you know, some of the barriers that their funds have. They've shared the barriers that they have as well about providing funding, but we have started those conversations to try to open that up. Last fall, I think it was, we surveyed our members and came up with a number of, at that time, for the folks that were more along the process of more formally establishing themselves, $32.5 million over 5 years was a request that we came up with for capital and operating funds to help grow those CLTs within our communities. And I think that's all we have for slides.
Yep, that is the end of the slides. So looking through the chat. All right, so first question for the panel. What lenders have you worked with here in Wisconsin?
I put a link in the chat for Madison area Community Land Trust and our partner lenders. Some of these are local, but a few of them are more regional and statewide as a starting place. Sorry, Ashley.
That's okay. I was going to say with the Coulee Community Land Trust, we've had a lot of success with our local, more regional or smaller, more local banks. We've had a lot of success with Merchants Bank early on. We've had some recent transactions with just a small local community bank. We've also had success with banks that will offer WIDA loans as part of their loan portfolio. So we've just not had any in ours with larger, more national banks.
In Milwaukee, I think early on we were able to attract mortgage companies. A group called Land Home Financial Services was very first up to offer support. Johnson's Bank eventually became one of our first lenders, but we've had conversations with a variety of banks, and recently we've been made aware that Associated Bank can do community land trust loans. There's also been banks like Bill Bank who was interested, but we haven't done a deal with them. And one of the other non-traditional way we've been able to get funding is we have a group in Milwaukee called Axe Housing who also has a lending department. So they've been able to help us with loans as well.
Yeah, and I would add to that from back. So just as a reference point, back in the day, there was a time when I worked at Couleecap and was part of the team that helped start the Coulee Community Land Trust. And one of the big challenges we did have was finding a lender for some of our first deals. And the thing that broke the dam for us was you'd heard Ashley mention Merchants Bank, and that was partially because they were doing land trust mortgages in Rochester for First Homes, which was a large land trust in Rochester, Minnesota. And so sometimes that can be the leverage piece. If you can find one lender doing this work somewhere, getting them to educate a branch in your area can be that bridge that you need to sort of make the thing happen, right? I had a question about generational wealth in this model. And I think that's a good question because that is one of the trade-offs to a degree of the land trust model. I'm not sure if which one of the panelists want to take a stab at it about, you know, the relationship between generating generational wealth and the reality of creating a stock of affordable housing through the land trust model.
I can start us off by saying conventional homeownership has not proven to be a good avenue for generational wealth building. We've seen that through the Clinton initiative to support more homeownership for low-income people, you know, from 1995 through the early 2000s. We saw Black homeownership increase, and then when the recession hit, it went lower than it was before. So all of these efforts to increase homeownership for people of color put them in a more precarious position, you could argue. So, you know, I think a lot of research shows that homeownership retention is the largest challenge to Black households seeing the benefits of homeownership. And so that's where I think the CLT model does a really tremendous job of homeownership retention, and that's proven with research. So that's where I would start to say that it's a really great option for people who have only had access to renting, and it's a good way to build equity to then get into the conventional homeownership market if that's, you know, what you're seeking or able to do. See Lamont.
Yeah, ditto. I think in Milwaukee, what we've seen is that home ownership hasn't bared out as a positive wealth builder. One thing I really like about land trust and, really just working through the established networks is that you get folks into a home buying counseling agency. They learn about budgeting, they learn about these things that are really important, but they also get access to down payment assistance. So a lot of folks have been able to come into a land trust ownership situation on the positive side of the equity with the principal by having that down payment assistance into the deal. The other thing is, and you're paying a less of a principal. We've been able to price our product at 20 to 35% below what's market rate, so they avoid PMI. They're paying less on a monthly, often a lot less than rent, particularly in Milwaukee. And then, the other big thing I think is that, this is in Milwaukee. Sometimes people buy at a high price point. They may buy a home that's somewhere around, 150. But when they sell that home, maybe they do benefit, a certain amount, $25,000, $50,000, but that hasn't been our market. I've seen a lot of people really buy at a high rate, and then it takes them 20 years before they get to the positive equity position on that loan. So it's nice that we come in with the reduced principal as well as the down payment assistance.
Yeah, and I think from my perspective, just echoing Lamont said a lot of it, but this is kind of a step for folks who are probably not ready for the open market and to buy what we would consider, traditional fee simple home ownership. I mean, we've got properties in our portfolio that are structured for families at 30% AMI, 50% AMI, and looking at prices of homes, those folks would probably never have purchased a home without the land trust model. So they're at least taking a step in the right direction towards some of that generational wealth for their family.
Thank you, panel. And just to sort of wrap that up, I do think you have to acknowledge that you may be reducing some of the generational wealth transfer, but I think as you heard all the panelists say, the trade-off is you're actually making generational wealth transfer possible. Because there was the Ford Foundation did a study through Grounded Solutions some years ago about land trusts, and one of the questions they did ask land trust owners was, essentially, do you regret the fact that you have an artificial restriction on the amount of equity you get at the end of the day when you sell your house? And sort of the universal answer that came out of that survey was, well, it's the question's not valid, because without the land trust, I would have never owned a house. So I would have never had this equity in the first place. So sure, would I like more? Yeah. But I would have never had it in the first place. So I don't know why you're asking me that question. There's a question of, is there a minimum number of units that make a CLT worth it? That is an excellent question. I'm going to throw it to the panelists because I know my opinion, but yes, I'll see what maybe we'll start with Lamont as a man who's going through this right now and has gone through the brain damage of starting this thing. What do you think? What minimum number of units that make it worth it?
We're at 10 units, and we envision that we need about 300 units to make it viable. We're limited by the capacity of developers and our partners who are going to produce these units, but we're also limited by our ability to raise funds for affordability, for development. So, coming into the land trust opportunity without the support of philanthropy or someone similar to a rich uncle, it's really daunting, and it could be different for every municipality that's starting one. But we know that we have to grow our unit count, and 300, I know that I throw that out. We don't even have 300 in the whole state of Wisconsin, but that's my goal. That's the goal where I think we would be at a point where, yeah, this land trust is going to be around forever. But in reality, I think you have to scale as quickly as you can. And that requires you to be opportunistic, and also to be kind of a little bit on the risk side of scaling. I wouldn't say that that's, the perfect answer for a new nonprofit that wants to do this work, but I just think you're going to have to be opportunistic and scale as quickly as you can.
Ashley or Olivia?
I'm hesitant to answer this one because it's a hotly debated topic among CLTs over like decades. So I think there's a couple examples of like CLTs that claim they have a self-sustaining portfolio, and most of us aren't there yet. And I think there's a question of do you need to keep growing in order to fulfill your mission, and just your goals to provide more housing to more people in your area. There's also a question of like how much post-purchase support do you want to provide? That requires staffing. So I think there's always reason to grow. And I've heard, from one of my favorite CLT practitioners, consultants, Jeff Washburn. I think his number is around 500 units that he believes makes a sustainable CLT in the Minneapolis area where he's practiced. So that's more the number I'm aiming for, but I want to admit that I also think we should keep growing as much as we can.
I don't have anything else to add on that one.
The piece I would add is that I think there's a lot of variance to that answer. Partly it depends if you're rural or if you're urban. Understanding that rural land trusts will inherently be smaller, but it also doesn't, how do you say it? Does it make sense to have like 10 little land trusts, or do you find a way to sort of regionalize it? I mean, these are pretty advanced concepts that probably outpace this presentation, but it is something that when you start working this, you need to think about. I will say this, and I think the panel would agree, you don't do this for like 2 units and then call it a day. Like, this is a lot of work to do for just 2 units and be like, oh, we're good now. You would want to have a plan for sort of this being a thing in your community for a long time. Is there an average startup fund amount that a community would need in order to get something started? Lamont, what you guys just started out, what was your experience?
I think we're pretty lean. We only have 2 staff people, myself and Laquisha Briggs, who's our homeownership manager. And we brought her on just in August. So, one, you're going to have to be kind of lean and mean getting going. And then 2, I think you're limited on what you can do by the funds that you have on hand. We benefited from the fact that there was that Inflation Reduction Act funding, or the Homes MKE project here in Milwaukee, where that there was money that was actually earmarked by the city of Milwaukee to do development of home ownership. But if, not for that, I would kind of look at our partnerships that we were able to be successful to work with existing housing providers via CDC. We got our first 4 units done with them. So costs were really minimum, other than the money we needed to buy down the affordability and also to support my staff. So that would have been a couple $100,000. We're probably up to around $300,000 in annual costs, with another, and I'm talking to operational, on the operation side, but then you need to think about, what's your model? And we didn't spend a lot of time on it, but if you're acquiring a unit, rehabbing it and selling it, that's going to be a lot more expensive than if you're partnering with Habitat, and Habitat is going to actually create the unit, and subsidize the final purchase price because they like the affordability restrictions. It's so many applications to the model of how much money you're going to need, but often you're going to need some capital costs, and that could be pretty significant depending on the city or geography that you're in. For us, we were fortunate. I think we probably have somewhere around a capital cost of about $1 million a year that we're going to be spending, and about 300,000 operational, just to be able to get to 20 units by the end of 2024.
Olivia or Ashley, do you have anything you want to add? Having been around, now this is a long time ago, having been around starting a land trust, I do think it varies a lot. And I think you'd also want to delineate, you heard Lamont talking about operational versus sort of capital. And so on the one hand, you have like, what's the cost to get the nonprofit started? And that number it can vary widely depending on if you have volunteers doing the work, paid staff, if you're within a bigger organization, or if it's a standalone completely. If you're going to hire a consultant, that consultant's going to can be $10,000 to $30,000. But then you're also going to need, at some point, if you're going to be buying land or rehabbing houses, you will need a capital source, right? That's hundreds of thousands of dollars, millions of dollars. But now you're getting into housing work. So maybe you're partnering with some other organizations who are already doing housing work. Maybe you're the first organization in your community to do housing work, so you're attracting new dollars. So there are different ways to get to that number. That capital number, though, is just about the housing work. You're just doing the housing work in a different way than maybe it's been done before. So I'm just going back to the chat, looking at some of the questions. Do any of the land trusts have things like housing cooperatives or rental units in their portfolios to support ranges of housing types or pipelines for prospective owners? I know the Couleecap Land Trust at this point doesn't. I don't believe Milwaukee does. Olivia, I know you guys have the sort of you don't have that. You have the Troy Gardens condo arrangement. So I think the short answer to that is nobody in Wisconsin yet does. There are land trusts who do have this. Champlain Land Trust has this in Vermont. So it's not impossible, but in Wisconsin at this point, I think most of the focus has really just been on home ownership. That can be condo ownership, but and I know Ashley, you were talking about you folks, the Couleecap Land Trust is doing some exploring around how to use the land trust to secure low-income housing tax credit properties when they do their 15-year exit, and making sure they remain affordable. So those are all concepts that land trusts can pursue. Oh, is there a reason we don't try to form a statewide CLT? Olivia, you're interested in taking a shot at that one to start with?
Yeah, it's a big question. I think there's a couple like practical things to consider, which is how far do you want to drive to help someone out in their home? Because we do a lot of driving around, and I guess theoretically maybe you could have kind of localities with staff, and it just seems it could get complicated quick. I think there's also been this debate among CLTs nationally around like how much could we share services and have sort of locally based operations, but one large nonprofit or something. And all of those efforts have basically fallen apart. I think there's a lot of challenges with doing that. And one of them is we're all in different localities and have a slightly different focus. And different challenges to address. So in Madison, the housing market is a lot different than it is in Milwaukee or in one of these rural land trusts, which there are several. And so having a locally committed board, and we also have residents involved in our board and in a stewardship committee. Having all of that local, I think, is really helpful in addressing what your local problems are. And so that's, I think, one of the biggest reasons is we emerge from local need, and then we network to support each other as we do similar things, but we're really place-based, and it's one of the kind of original like tenets of how a land trust like should operate, is being really place-based and responding to local needs, and where possible involving local people in development and decision making.
Yeah, I would echo that. I mean, it's a lot of community driven work. You know, Todd has mentioned that our land trust in the past started with several municipalities and the local county talking about how do we keep homeownership permanently affordable for folks and what are the needs, and then kind of balloons and morphs into the land trust. And every community is going to have something different that they need. Our land trust actually serves 4 counties, and the needs in some of our more rural counties are different than the needs within the city of La Crosse. And having that community input, that community buy-in, that community investment is really what is going to also make this successful.
Yeah, the community engagement piece is critical, hence the community land trust. And I think people have to be cognitive that there could be town hall meetings, there could be political connections to be made. There could be information sessions that go to the very local level, small groups of maybe even 2 and 3 individuals. And so I think it's more daunting to try to do that on a large scale. You're probably going to get a lot more buy-in, and if you're doing it in a very localized manner.
Yeah, I to echo sort of what's been said, housing is a very personal thing, and our communities are fundamentally defined by how we use our land. When you think of your town, you think of how that town is defined by how this land is used. And housing, at the end of the day, is about land use, right? And so how we use our housing defines how our communities are formed. And to a degree, having some sort of statewide organization that's having a say in how little towns or this city or that city is being formed becomes, I think, problematic. Could it be done with like advisory committees and maybe, but people like to have a local face that they can go talk to. And I think it's hard to do that without having sort of boots on the ground. Now that the counter to that, quite honestly, is the economics, right? So I said before, does every little town need a land trust? And the answer to that is maybe, but can that be financially sustainable? Can every small town in southwestern Wisconsin support a land trust if it's only got 4 houses in it? I don't know, probably not. So then you heard Ashley talk about a regional land trust basically at 4 counties. And she's right, it does have its own challenges. Hillsborough's needs are different than the city of La Crosse's needs, which are different than the city of Onalaska's needs. And how you balance all those as a regional land trust is actually fairly challenging. We've had, when I was in La Crosse, we've had certain municipalities who I won't mention their names come to us and say, we don't want the land trust in our community because we feel it attracts low-income people and we have enough of those. So, okay, how do you deal with that, right? Which is, by the way, incorrect. Those low-income folks are already there. You're just providing them a chance to own a house now. So, continuing through Ann's question, could closing church properties be a possibility for adding to a land trust model? Lamont says yes. Yeah, absolutely. Particularly if they're going to be converted to housing, condominiumized. I live in La Crosse, and just a block down from me is somebody took an old church a long time ago, actually, and turned it into some really nice condos. So could you do that and put them in a land trust? Yep, You certainly can. How much land per unit is recommended? That is that's a question that is, I think, defined by your community. The land per unit in Milwaukee is radically different than the land per unit in Arcadia, Wisconsin. I consulted in a community once where they told me the minimum they would tolerate is a ½ acre per house. I said, well, it's gonna be a lot of lawn mowing. So, everybody's different. So the model is very diverse. So that I think is the question. Oh, sorry, we had one more about, do you have examples of employers investing in CLTs and then doing some sort of right of first refusal for their employees? Particularly interested, this might be of interest to healthcare systems. So this is a fairly advanced question. I'll throw it to the panel. I'm not sure if any of you know of examples of that.
In Rochester, Minnesota, the Mayo Clinic did something like this. I'm not sure the details of the right of first refusal or not, but they invested very heavily in starting a CLT there, and it's one of the largest CLTs that I know of. And they, yeah, it was for this reason of workforce housing for people, working in the hospital. So I think it's a really great example to, continue to really promote and think about for sure.
Yeah, and Olivia mentioned First Homes. We had mentioned it earlier as well. For those who don't know the story real briefly, at First Homes is that Mayo Clinic in Rochester was struggling with an issue where employees were unable to find affordable homeownership housing in the city of Rochester. And we're not talking the doctors and the surgeons, we're talking the phlebotomists and the lab techs and all the people it takes to make a healthcare system work. And they stumbled across the land trust model and they agreed to invest $7 million if the rest of the community would match it. And so they did. And so First Homes was created with $14 million and they rapidly created over 400 units of affordable housing, targeted at first-time home buyers. And so that goes to sort of that healthcare model of how do you create a place for your employees and provide them a chance within the community to have a place to live, so they don't just leave. So that's the questions from the chat. Are there questions the folks on the group have that they haven't had a chance to ask? Otherwise, we have just a few minutes. And there's a couple question topics we were going to float out. One thing we didn't address and didn't come up in the questions was, and you heard Lamont mention it a little bit before, but I was going to ask the panel to talk just a little bit about the different models for sourcing units into a land trust, the developer, the home buyer led, and the partner acquisition models. So if maybe the panel could talk about that just a little bit.
So I can talk a little bit about how at Couleecap Community Land Trust, we have primarily done the developer-led model as well as the acquisition and rehab model. The developer-led model is really where you find a partner. One of our primary partner has been our local Habitat for Humanity. And so they build and develop the homes. And then when it's time for the home to be sold, we provide subsidy to buy down the mortgage and put the property in our land trust that way. We also did a significant amount of acquisition and new construction of our own properties through funding we had. So we were doing the development and the construction for those units.
At Madison, we've basically done all of it in different moments. So we've done new construction where we were the developer. even for developments as large as 30 condo units. We've also done buyer initiated programs where we get support from the city of Madison, and the home buyer, which we select with our process, goes and finds a home with staff help, that the subsidy will help bring down to a price that they can afford. And then those homes are put into the land trust for long term. We haven't done that as much recently. We have done our own sort of acquisition rehab, which I think is a little easier in our market right now, where if we find a home that we can afford with the subsidy, we'll buy it and rehab it and then sell it to a buyer who wants it from our list. And we've also done partner developer projects, which we're actually partnering with Todd, the partnership right now, on a couple homes for the land trust.
Yep. Perfect. Thank you, guys. I will, the last, and maybe we'll end on this, but the last thing I would also say is never let a good crisis go to waste. Probably the most tremendous growth the Couleecap Community Land Trust went through was under the Neighborhood Stabilization Program. That was 12 homes or 13 homes, and you know, the original growth projections was maybe 2 homes a year, I think, when we first started the Couleecap Land Trust. And then it was like 2 homes a year, 2 homes a year, 14 homes in like 2 years, because the Neighborhood Stabilization Program just happened and no one could have predicted it. But we happened to be in a position that when that happened, we were able to capitalize on the opportunity. And here we are now with the American Rescue Plan. So you never know quite when something will happen, but if you have a tool like the Land Trust ready, you can utilize it. If when something like that happens, you're just then start thinking about getting something like a land trust started, by the time you make it happen, it's all over, right? The money's allocated and spent, and you're too late to the game, and you won't have a chance. So and I don't think anyone's saying that land trusts are the only way to do affordable housing. The argument is land trusts are a great tool in the toolbox of affordable housing. So with that, we are up almost against 1 o'clock. So I want to thank our panelists. Thank you, Lamont and Olivia and Ashley. I want to thank Marlo and Couleecap for the opportunity to share the land trust message. We always call it a movement because it still feels like somewhat of a religion. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to you, Marlo, and thank you very much.
Yeah, well, thank you all for presenting. You know, land trusts I always learn something new about this model the more I hear into it. And, you know, I think it's exactly right that this is something that communities, regions, states, entities need to be thinking about more and more as we go through this crisis called housing in this state, in this nation. So all tools are good tools in fighting that, and you know, building up that community support to have communities start thinking about this as an option, I think is super vital. So just a couple of last logistical things. If you haven't already, please take the survey. That helps us understand what you all want to hear from these. You know, we want to make these as useful and efficient within an hour of time that we have every month. And there's so many good topics on housing that we can touch, but it does take time and labor to find the speakers and to find the folks to come do that. So to help brainstorm some of that, crowdsource that out to you all is very helpful. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Please join us next month as we talk about well, it's too many slides ago. I forgot what our topic is now, but please join us next month. And if you haven't already, sign up for the Badger State Housing Alliance, where you'll be able to see a recording of this along with what's on that, any updates that we have through our newsletter and other updates that we send out. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing And stop recording.